Wait, let's see. Wait a second. Okay, we are recording. Hi, everybody. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland. Before we get this interview started, I'd like all of the people out there that are watching to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube and BitChute channels, and also share the video with your friends and family. Let them know what we are up to. This is David P. France TV. We are a platform for creators and creatives, artists, inventors, thought leaders, small business owners, and entrepreneurs and the like. Today, I'm speaking with someone, it's not necessarily unusual, but in terms of how I connected, it was through another social media platform via TikTok. Today, I'm speaking with Lucas Ashby. And first of all, before I continue, how are things going, Lucas?
Things are going great for me. Yeah, just a nice Sunday here, so weather's good. Finally stopped raining, so yeah, I'm enjoying life.
Well, you and I met. I actually came across you on TikTok, and what I want to tell the audience is sort of the context. On TikTok, the way that it works is that you have a For You page, right? It's called For You.
Yes,
and
yes.
It captures your algorithms, things that you've been researching, things that are sort of in your database knowledge of computer program or so. And I was reluctant to join TikTok for a variety of reasons, because I'd have to learn a whole new way of doing things, right? But when I did, your profile was one of the first profiles that popped up. And Lucas has extensive knowledge and personal background, being biracial, but there's something else that you also bring to the table, which is like you almost are like this encyclopedia of information. So every time your profile would pop up, I would always stop on it, because I was like, okay, I'm going to learn something new about something I didn't know before.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that.
Right. Well, tell the audience, give us some background about your story and sort of how you came to create this TikTok profile, and then we can go from there.
Oh man, yeah. I'll try and keep it as short as possible. But yeah, basically, I was like you. I really did not like the app at all. That when my wife was on, I just thought it was just a bunch of teenage kids doing whatever. And then basically, I think I got on one day, and it was something that I've always had in the back of my head. I've always kind of thought about growing up in a biracial home, especially though, because to the average person, I appear completely white. And so I would hear sometimes racist things. And so there would usually be the awkward encounter where a few minutes later, where I would have to tell, hey, yeah, I'd have to drop it in there, I am, I'm not on your side. And so basically I did a video about that, and it exploded. I didn't even expect that. And so then I thought, okay, why don't I try and go into topics about that, but also just kind of going into different cultural relations in the United States. And so, yeah, it's been really cool just kind of navigating that and having a dialogue with people.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because what was the topic that came up that was like, well, I'll just get right to it, which was that you lived, or you're from Texas, right?
Yes.
And you grew up in North Texas initially.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the TikTok story that made me say, okay, I got to reach out to him, was that you were discriminated against. Your family had to move. Oh
yeah, totally.
Yeah, your family had to move from where you grew up to another part of Texas. Go into that briefly, and then we'll jump off.
Oh, definitely. It's crazy because, and that's something, again, it was basically what happened before that was a woman in a comment basically tried to act like racism was something that was 60 years ago, because I mentioned something that happened. And then I said, well, that happened a lot more recently. I gave my own personal experience. And this was about the year 99, year 2000 was where it really heated up. And that's when we actually ended up moving. And so we lived in rural North Texas. My mom owned kind of a business out there. And basically all of a sudden my parents were getting harassed. My mom, I remember I'd overhear her telling my dad about her car getting run off the road. or things didn't happen. My brother would get into a fight because they said a slur about my mom or about one of us. Names were said about my sister, who's my half sister. So she, she's fully black. And then, but then it came to basically a point where one day, I think it was during the summer, where they wouldn't let us go outside. We had no idea why. And so I remember a few weeks later, I was with my dad in his truck. And I remember I guess since I was his oldest, he felt he needed to be frank and tell me what happened. And he said, we didn't let you guys come out for a while because there was spray paint all in the truck. I remember we had to clean up some spray paint, but it didn't say anything. I didn't know what it said. And he told me it said the N-word "love her" all over the truck. And I think that's when they kind of realized, okay, we need to get out of here. Like, there's a point where fighting is good, but then also there's a point where you have to worry about the safety of your family. And so I think that definitely changed my outlook of racism, and just seeing how there are certain pockets where that's still sadly an issue, And so, yeah. And we moved to a place, Central Texas, where it was much more diverse, and that was not an issue, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, yesterday when we spoke, my question was, well, how did your parents meet? And, where were they when they met? And you can go on into that, but this is all happening in Texas, right? I mean,
this is all happening in Texas. Yeah. Both my parents are from the Midwest. My mom grew up, nice middle-class family in Indianapolis. Both her parents did well for themselves. My dad kind of moved around a lot, but he was from the Midwest for the most part. And so, they moved down. They met in Texas on a blind date, but and they wanted to get into the ranch lifestyle, and my mom also wanted to start her business out there, her assisted living. And so, very rural Texas. I mean, we were probably about 30 minutes from the nearest town, and that town only had about 20,000 people. And so, very rural. And I think it was, I guess my dad was just naive and thinking maybe, hey, because they grew up in a different part of the United States where I don't think that was as much of an issue. And so just seeing a place that's very rural, I assume that he was probably a little naive with that, and yeah.
So how did that affect you growing up? I mean, obviously it was because I think every child, every kid, everyone has their story, right? Of the moment when they realize what they thought it wasn't really so, right? So, how did it affect you, and sort of how did you begin to walk from that point on?
Oh man, I remember we kind of eschewed a lot of that lifestyle. I remember my brothers and we had very thick country accents in the way we talked. I remember I purposely tried not to talk that way afterwards because they reminded me of those people. And I just remember just being very vigilant soon after. I think my mom also was very vigilant. She grew up in the 50s where passing and people, foregoing their family to try and do basically. And so I think she was always kind of a little hesitant and nervous, that we would basically not kind of disregard our own ancestry. And so that kind of made me have to be a little more vocal about that in certain situations, and also just be more prideful of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you brought up the issue of passing, this was not so far ago, right?
No.
For people to make the choice, there was a time where for people that are in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, in the United States, there was a time where if you were born Black or biracial or mixed race, and you were light enough to pass as white, it would be called white passing. And there are many stories of people, some that perhaps my parents know, not necessarily that I know, that did so. So this was very common amongst Black society, I guess, the knowledge of it at least, and it was talked about. So so you bring this up, and your parents, or at least your mom, was very, she had a strong position with regard to this, and making sure that you were mindful of the situation. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. And how, I mean, because I can tell you right now that the video, I cannot remember the video that blew up on TikTok, right? But I can tell you that when I came across your profile, I instantly stopped. And this was before I even knew what you were about to say, right? So part of me, in other words, part of what's in me as well is this sensibility with regard to race and who is part of the diaspora, if you will, right? So, I mean, I stopped scrolling and said, what's going on here, you know, and then you, and I also comment on the fact that I didn't necessarily know that you were from Texas until you said it, you know, coming from your own mouth. So I couldn't pinpoint exactly where you were from. I thought maybe, you know, Louisiana-ish, but still, I wasn't necessarily sure, right? I mean, I just thought it was the way that you were talking and I would say the quality, when I say the quality of what was coming out of your mouth, which that was the thing that made me stop. Right, so it was very much like, oh, this guy's like an encyclopedia here. Let me see what he's going to say next. I mean, obviously, you know a lot about the subject matter because on your TikTok profile, that's what you talk about. What are the things that interest you about the topic around race?
Oh man. Yeah, the things that interest me about it is just, number one is the variance. You know, the variance you get not just by nation, you know, because the idea of what is Black and it is different in South Africa and the United States and Switzerland in different places, but also the idea of even just with the generations, you know, the generations that you talk to, you know, because, you know, yeah, my mom came from that generation where sadly almost, like if you had, you know, like we talked about the one drop rule, if you kind of eschewed that and you just ignored that, you were in a sense turning your back on your community. Because and so that's just a very interesting dynamic talking to people about, because especially a lot of the younger viewers on TikTok, they have no idea about that. And so like when you talk to them, you know, they'll try and bring up some, oh, what? No, it's not like, it's like, no, this is how things were. And this is how many of the people who I talk to on the app that are of, you know, Gen X, the baby boomer generation, or even late millennial, that's how they see it. And so it's really interesting kind of navigating those discussions amongst, different geographical groups, but also different age groups. And so, it's just very interesting.
So in other words, you said the younger people don't know, the older people do. Is that what you're saying? That the younger
people
are
definitely.
Like oblivious?
Definitely.
Yeah. Go on.
It's very interesting, you know, because I'll hear them, you know, because I'll hear people bring up, you know, they'll say race is a phenotype. But then the idea of a phenotype is very subjective, because then, you know, it depends on who you talk to. Okay, some person could say, oh, well, you look like this, you know, you know, and so it's really, really interesting when you realize how much of these things is very socially constructed when you discuss with people. And I mean, not saying it doesn't matter. It does matter because of what the impact it's had on people. But it's just very interesting.
Yeah. I'll tell you a brief story, and we'll go back. I have more questions to ask you. When I was working at a pharmaceutical company a couple of years ago, we had an intern, or an apprentice, come from Nigeria. And I think I told you a bit of the story, which was when he met me, he instantly said, okay, he ascribed me more as a white. He didn't say that I was white. He just said, oh, you're like Obama. That's all he said. You're like Obama, right? And then he was listening to how I spoke on the telephone. He was, and one time I think I was yelling at somebody, or I raised my voice, and then I hung up the phone, and then he looks at me and he says, you see, Obama, right? And of course, I'm laughing inside because, you know, I understand where he's coming from, right? I understand 100%, right? So from his point of view, I was a bit whitewashed in some respect, right?
Mm.
But in the United States, no, right? In
Mm.
the United States, absolutely not. When I went to Morocco, they knew something was up because I think I was walking differently, right? They could tell just in terms of how I was walking that I was not from, from the area.
Morocco, yeah.
Yeah. So then when I was leaving the airport, I went to get a magazine or something, and the guy behind the counter said, what did he say? He says, are you from, he didn't say, are you from Morocco? He says, are you African? And I said, no. And then he goes, like, what a pity. Like he kind of snickered, but it was almost like, oh, it's too bad, right? It's too bad or something like that. But it's very, very, when you talk about subjectivity.
Oh, totally.
Right. But people can pick up things.
Very much. They can pick up things. Oh, totally.
Yeah. Culturally, also your speech pattern.
Very much.
Very much so. It's interesting also, though, I do have connection with the Nigerian way, the way that they so their culture, the way they move.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I understand it 100%. So he and I, the guy from work, I connected on that basis, but he still saw me as Obama. He did not give me, like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm reaching out like, oh, my brother. And he's like, not really, right? He still did not really give me 100%, right? So, I mean, as you said, it's very subjective, right? I think it will be interesting to see what happens when we post this, what people will say, because, yeah, I mean, we talked about it before. My growing up, it was not as bad as my parents, but there was still this sort of hierarchical.
Oh, definitely.
Right, preference.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And
so,
go ahead.
What were you saying?
Actually, it's interesting because you mentioned that about Africa too. And so I have a friend from Zimbabwe, and I've noticed, especially like in Zimbabwe and South Africa, where there was like during the caste system where there was like a larger group of people that were biracial. That's the way he sees me in a sense. And so it's very interesting how even just, geographically where you are, people, like you said, the subjectivity and how people see you, it's just very interesting. But yeah,
it's almost to the point. I'll bring this when you talk about Zimbabwe. I was in the train in Switzerland, and this is when this is a while back, and this is when I had. I mean, I haven't disclosed this to people, but I had symptoms, heavy symptoms of a Lyme poisoning, Lyme disease, right? So I was on the train and I could barely move. This guy comes up to me, black guy, and there's a sea of white people, and he starts to question me out loud in front of everyone about who I am, and it was really, really, right. Like, but I answered the question or something. And then he asked me if I wanted a beer. Right. And then I said, no. He said, well, you too good to get a beer or something like that. I was like, well, no. Yeah. I said, I actually have Lyme disease, so I'm not going to, drink this alcohol. And then all of a sudden he looked very apologetic. Right. And then I ran into that guy not once, but I think 2 more times on the train. When I told him like how old I was, and then I told him what, my situation, he was so apologetic. He didn't come out and apologize, but he ended up sort of becoming apologetic and then showing me pictures of his family. His father was Swiss and his mother from Zimbabwe. And he bragged about not having to have an undergraduate degree to get a job at Google. I mean, all kinds of stuff he was throwing out to me during this train ride. And he even offered, he walked me to the next train after that.
Wow.
I saw him 2 other times. And when I saw him, he came over and sat next to me. But this came as a result of that first encounter where no one in Switzerland is really giving me a hard time. No one. But because he had this background where his mom was from Zimbabwe, he had a perspective. And he grew up in Zimbabwe and just had moved to Switzerland.
That's wild.
He confronted me on the train. It's just like, who are you? And what are you doing here? Like, I'm more Swiss than you are. This is sort of the conversation. So in other words, I bring the story up to say this kind of thing still happens. It doesn't just happen, okay, outside of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, at least when I was growing up, it also happened when I was growing up as well. It's very subtle, though. Very totally. Subtle.
So you were going on, you said you're talking about hierarchical, I remember you were talking about different just kind of like hierarchies and stuff.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's interesting.
It exists. I mean, I think less so now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally.
Less so now. What we're talking for people that don't understand, like within the Black community, there is colorism, right? There is colorism. I think it's less and less. It's less and less so. I think when my parents were growing up, or even before that, it was a big thing. It's a huge thing, right? So you see it. You can see it just by looking at the community. You can see it. But I think the rules of the game of life have changed quite a bit.
Very much.
Not necessarily as prevalent as it was when my parents were growing up, or even when I was growing up. Yeah.
Oh, completely.
So what has this done for you, like with regard to you being on the TikTok? How has it changed your perspective in terms of, the race issue, in terms of also, let's say, what people are willing to talk about on TikTok as well, right? I mean.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting. It's interesting in the sense that just like what people are willing to talk about. I mean, definitely. Anytime I do a video that I know is going to be very serious, I usually kind of set it back for about a couple of days. I'm like, let me let this stew over a little bit, and just kind of like, and I'll kind of go back, like, because here's, and the big thing you gotta realize, especially with these videos, is you got maximum a minute, and so you really need to make sure that what you say is said, what you need to say is said, but also leave out any things that could be implied. And so that's the biggest thing, because I've noticed the biggest things that people tend to get angry about or argue about will be things that I won't even say. It'll be things that will be implied. And so that's where I really have to try and make sure and cover my bases and try and think before I even do a video, okay, what would somebody think about this topic? Okay. For example, kind of like when I did a video about the late actress Freddie Washington and just covering her life. And then I remember early on, a very early video, I accidentally said, because I used the word passing, I said, oh, well, she just looked, she looked white. Uh-huh. And so I said that, and so someone kind of took it, oh, she didn't pass. I was like, no, I didn't mean it that way. And so I very much have to cover my bases and so anyway, so that's the big thing. And then I think once that's done, and once homework's done very well with these videos, I think people can actually have a good discussion about that and actually discuss what was actually talked about in the video. And so it's been good. I mean, there's always going to be some crazies, but that's usually very few and far between. For the most part, I've noticed, even not on just my videos, but other people's videos when I watch them, if I think that's a great place about something like TikTok, is that if it's something that is a terrible idea, sometimes those people put them out there and people will very quickly speak on that. And some people, and I think it helps you maybe gain insight into realizing, hey, there's other people out here that I'm talking to, and maybe what I said is hurtful. Uh-huh. Or you can also try and say something that gives somebody a new perspective that they hadn't seen before, And so it's just a really interesting dynamic on there.
Yeah. Look, if I had not seen your videos, you and I would not be talking today. I mean, clearly. I mean, and also, I mean, just to give people even a sharper idea of kind of why I was so interested, you do seem to know a lot about this topic, right? I mean, the fact that you know Freddie Washington and you know the people that you're talking about who are the mixed race or biracial, and you're illuminating, giving some background on why these people were important or are important, right?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I think, sadly, part of it ties into some colorism, but if you look at some of the people who were some of the, I guess, pioneers in the early Black like civil rights movement, and some of them, I mean, like a lot of them usually were either mixed race or they're isolated because of colorism, sadly. And so it's just interesting covering that topic, but also just kind of covering just like, because, you know, I mean, the idea of somebody like that's biracial, I mean, obviously that's something that's interesting to me because that's something I've lived. And so it's just interesting getting to talk about people in history where they maybe didn't have it as easy as me. You know, they couldn't, some people chose to pass because they were trying to get ahead to this or that life, but they abandoned their roots. And then there were some people who, even with discrimination, chose to honor their heritage and their background and fight for the equality of others, like Freddie Washington. And it's just so interesting learning about those people. And I wish that they were talked about more.
Yeah. Do you feel that you have it easy? I mean, do you recognize it, or let's say, for example, you talked about how you'd be in company and then you'd hear remarks, racist remarks, and I've seen other TikTok videos of biracial people talking about that specific situation, right? So obviously, you know, there are people that did not or don't know that you are. You have Black heritage. I mean, how has it been easier? If it's been easier for you, how has it been easier for you? Can you give people an idea?
Really good question. I think that, and so I think sometimes people will speak from a place of just ignorance, and I mean, and that's fine. You can just try and correct it. And then sometimes people speak from a place of genuine malice, and that's where it gets scary. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, yeah, I've definitely had it easier. I mean, not just because of the way I look, but also because of the time period that I'm living in, where, I mean, the idea of, I mean, it's still something that's becoming more and more, still something people are working out, but the idea that, hey, you can try and embrace both sides of your family. You can try and, because, I mean, that's something that's still very, in American society, but yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, I do think I have it easy in the sense that I'm not having to pick one specific thing at the idea of, hey, do I want to get ahead in life and try and get this job or this job, but completely abandon my mom and my whole background? I mean, I don't have to do that in today's day. And so I definitely, you know, and I mean, it's just crazy, you know, even when you read some of the books from that time period that cover the topic, it's extremely sad, you know, the idea that, you know, I mean, yeah, you know, that they, you know, crossed their mom or dad on one side of the street and they would not even look at them, you know, and that, I cannot even imagine the pain as a parent of having that happen to you, you know, and I'm very thankful that it has gotten better. Obviously still work to do, but it has gotten better.
Yeah. One of the books that you reviewed on your TikTok was Pudd'nhead Wilson. I think you brought up. And I read that book years ago, right? And just so you guys know, Lucas and I have like a 20-year age difference. Even though it doesn't, you know, it doesn't feel that way, right? But it so when you brought up that book, I was like, wait a minute, like this guy, he is the encyclopedia, right? Because you're all the books that you were bringing up, I know about, right? So Pudd'nhead Wilson, Mark Twain, two young or babies that were switched, that were biracial, right?
Yeah, and basically so, one was white, one was
white and one was light, right? So they switched, and then the light one became the wealthy one, and amazing. I think it's better than Tom Sawyer, but you know, of course, that's going against the American literary canon, right? So, but in my opinion, that story says more about the United States than I think Tom Sawyer did. That's just in my opinion.
Totally, you know, and I think that's the hardest part. I think for some people is that they'll hear these stories and they get offended. And I think the thing they have to realize when they hear these is, I'm not implicating you. I'm telling a story here of what's happened in the past. Now, if we continue to try and uphold these terrible things, then yeah, I guess you're implicated. But basically, I mean, no, I mean, it very much is very descriptive of the time for both sides. And I think that's what's so great about that story. I agree with you.
Yeah. Last time we were talking, which was yesterday, you had a Cafe du Monde mug, right? Cafe du Monde, right? So I went to law school and business school in New Orleans, and I'll tell you the irony of going to school there versus when I was in Philadelphia, right? So when I arrived in New Orleans and I got off the plane, I knew instantly that this place was going to be good for me. But when you think about the history of New Orleans, right? People where I come from, which is the Northeast, they were like, isn't it really racist there? And New Orleans and Louisiana definitely has a history of racism, right? However, I did much better in New Orleans than I did in Philadelphia. Things went much better for me in New Orleans than I felt at ease. I felt like this was part of, kind of my cultural heritage. Even though I didn't grow up there, I understood what was happening. And I had an inside lane, I felt like I had an inside lane for a variety of reasons to the culture, more so than I did in Philadelphia, even though I went to school, University of Pennsylvania, and we were in West Philly. For whatever reason, the way that the whole racial dynamic was set up in Philadelphia was much starker, much harsher than in New Orleans. And so my question to you is, I'm assuming that you have been to New Orleans.
Oh, yeah. My wife's from around there, so yeah.
Right. Your wife is from New Orleans?
Her family's from south of there, Homa, so.
So she then, right? So, I mean, and can you describe, since you've spent time there, can you describe from your perspective what I'm talking about with regard to that? I know you have a beat on it, right?
I think it's just, I love that city so much. There was obviously, there was definite racial issues there, but I think it's one of the few cities I remember where, especially, it was more lighter skinned African Americans, but many of them were able to move ahead there more so than many other places in the United States for a long time. And also, I think it's just one of the few places where I think you just have this beautiful blend of culture. You got the West African culture, and you got Caribbean, you got French, you got Spanish, you got all this. And I think it's such like a beautiful mixture. And I don't know, it's just something that I agree with you. When I've gone there, I don't have any Creole ancestry, but I feel such a connection to that city, and it feels, it's just, I think it's that part of, it's a city that's been more welcoming, more so for a longer time than many other places have been.
Right. There's irony there too, because they had and continue to have issues there, right? I mean, there are issues, but I'm telling you, what's strange to me is that, in other words, I felt there was more racism in Philadelphia.
Oh, I agree. I could see that.
Than in New Orleans. That the way that I had to move in Philadelphia was very, very, very different. And this is because I was, at an institution, a university that was mainly historically white, right? So we were only breaking in at that moment in mass, right? There weren't a lot of Black students at this particular institution. Whereas, let's say, for example, New Orleans, everywhere you look, there are Black people. Uptown, it's different. Uptown versus the rest of New Orleans still, and also Metairie. But still, it opened the door. In other words, for me, spending time in New Orleans opened the door to being Black in America in a way that I did not have access to prior to going to school there.
Man, that's incredible.
Yeah,
it's just
it gave me access to that no one else. Same thing for Harlem. So I lived in New Orleans and I lived in Harlem, and I'm like, all right, it's a wrap. I mean, I feel like I've done, and now people may say Chicago or wherever else, but I'm like, I've done it. New Orleans, Harlem, right? So I've experienced you know, kind of the two of the meccas, I guess we want to call it.
Cultural capitals, yeah.
Yeah, cultural capitals, exactly.
And that's a good point, though, what you just said there. And just like, I mean, with just Black Americans in New Orleans is that, yeah, I mean, the universities and just places, I mean, and that's, I mean, and people have been living there side by side for so long, you know, and I think that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. Not only is it a huge deal, I'll tell you this, and then, I mean, I want to hear a little bit more, and I'm not going to keep you that much longer.
Oh, yeah.
But what was amazing about it, let's say when you grew up, where you grew up, which is North Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a history of or relationship between Blacks and whites. So here you guys come, and from the outside, particularly the people that read your TikTok, they're like, "What's the big deal, right?" But you were so distinctly different because they didn't have the interaction, and they knew you were different from the offset, right?
Very much.
Let's say in New Orleans, the only reason why they knew that I was different was kind of the same way that the Nigerian guy knew that I was different. Right? Obviously, he's not from here because I was a bit too fast in terms of my talking and the way that I was moving in New Orleans, and people didn't move that quickly. Yeah. Right. But you know, they knew I was from New York, New Jersey. Right. They knew I was from New York, New Jersey, but they would give me the benefit of the doubt from so many different, ways that I felt like it was an easy walk into and that's with white society and Black society. So in other words, I made some of my established lifelong connections in New Orleans, not just with Black people, but also with white people at that point. Whereas in Philadelphia, I felt like I was fighting for my life. It's like, oh my God, it was brutal, so.
That's
it is interesting, right?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Just the dynamics regionally.
Yep.
But yeah.
So I'm not going to keep you much longer. What else can you share with us with regard to your experience on TikTok or anything else that you just, I'm looking forward to seeing more of your TikToks, right? So I already got, you seem to be able to push that information together in a minute or less.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I mean, just going forward, I love kind of telling stories of other people that did that, but also, I think the most comforting feeling in the world is knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that somebody else has had that same experience as you. And so, and I think it's kind of, I like trying to point out people that have had those experiences that have been in that, and I think it's a lot more common than people want to realize in America, especially it's getting more common, and so I'd like to, just kind of discuss not just passing amongst in the white Black sense, but also passing that happened throughout history in other countries. I really want to talk about Edith, I think Beer basically or Edith von Beer, because she was a woman who passed as Aryan during the Nazi regime, and she was a Jewish woman, and that story is just very fascinating to me. So it's just talking about that, but also just talk about, I think the biggest thing is I tend to also flow with just kind of what people talk about and what people mention in the comments. And but I have realized, though, just even mentioning my experiences and just, either with people that are white or people that are Black, and just kind of how they act before and after they know who I am is very interesting. It's always very interesting,
And have people approached you like me? Like, I've reached out and said, hey, I want to talk to you. What has been the feedback and how have people approached you?
So the funny thing is the people that tend to be the most very open and like, oh yeah, I already know about you, is people from New Orleans, like, yeah. I was like, I know people like you. You're nothing new. But and then it's interesting, just talking because sometimes white people will kind of be, well, you're white, you're not really Black. It's like, well, I mean, I could agree with you, except my experiences dictate differently. But then, and then someone that may be Black, will kind of try and base, I think, like who I married off of, well, like, did you marry someone that was also?
Right. I saw that TikTok. Yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting, the questions, because there's so many idiosyncrasies and just questions that people have, that time comes and I'm just like, just trying to like, just.
Hey, look, for whatever reason, I get it. I don't know why I get it. God knows. But I mean, I get it for whatever reason. And part of it, I think, and I shared with you before, my grandmother is biracial, and we learned later on, and then my mom looks biracial, right? So I didn't realize the subtle impact that it had on our family until much later. And I'm like, oh, okay, this could be what is happening here, or even how people treated my mom versus how they treat the rest of us.
Yes, that's a fair point. When we talked about colorism, you know, I mean, my mom, looking at how it turned out, she was definitely like lighter skin, but she also got ahead very well in life, you know, even more so than my own dad. And you know, I think, yeah, it definitely helped that. Yeah, I mean, she had lighter skin, and that's definitely sadly like a product of colorism in American society, especially in the past, and even in some ways now too. But yeah. Just,
and your mom, from when I see the pictures, your mom was an attractive lady. She was not. I mean,
my dad, on the other hand, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mom was like, oh, he's like, look, when you put your stuff out on TikTok, they are examining, like me, right? They're examining you, right? They're like, all right, so who is this dude? And blah, blah, blah. I think it's great. I think it's great that you're sharing your story, you know, and if there's anything else, anything else you'd like to share, any other anecdotes or stories or upcoming TikTok stories that you'd like to share, and then I'll let you go. I mean, it's been great speaking to you. And
very great. Very great. I mean, yeah, there's gonna be a lot. I definitely want to cover a lot of people. Hopefully Alexander Dumas also.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, thank you so much.
Hey, look, thank you. I mean, it's been a pleasure, and you know, we'll get the video up as quickly as we can. I mean, I'm a bit behind, but look, I'm excited to talk to you. And even though we have very different backgrounds growing up, I mean, I definitely understand and connect with what you are doing with your TikTok and how you're sharing your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.